Good afternoon. Welcome to Risk Management for Meetings and Events. This is Paula Henry, and today we're going to be talking about potential risks. How do we describe them and how do we identify them? So risk management, the crux of risk management is identifying potential risks and identifying whether they're speculative or absolute. And understanding how to do this for one risk will lay the foundation for you to be able to reveal multiple potential risks within an event. You'll find that as an event, events that are larger involve more domains and multiple functional units rather than an event that's small. So that makes sense, right? So when you're evaluating a large event and you're looking for the potential risk that you think is most important, just figure that out and then you can go with whether it's absolute or speculative. Revealing potential risks requires critical thinking, and that's because there's no right or wrong answer, and it's definitely not a black and white scenario. So a potential risk is defined by the situation that it occurs in. So you can look at a particular risk in one situation and it'll be absolute. You can look at it in a different situation and it'll be speculative. So remember, it all depends on how that risk is framed. So we can talk about situations. So we referred to that in another video about how weather is a condition. You have attendees, you have equipment, you have the location. These are all things that contribute to the possibility of potential risks. So make sure, again, that you don't say weather is a potential risk or the location is a potential risk, that those things might be the impetus for potential risk to be present, but they are not the potential risk. So how do we describe a potential risk? So to best explain this, I'm going to give you a contrast. So let's look or listen to what some people have written and their descriptions of potential risk, and then I'll talk about maybe how it could have been written a little better. So here's one example. This person writes, "Public relations management is a speculative risk. When dealing with public relations, you need to be careful. The public will assist in advertising the event. This can be wonderful and if it increases the attendees and places the production under a good name. The show reviews will go up and assist in sales with following shows. You also have the chance of losing. Let's say someone gets hurt on stage and now the local paper writes about it in Sunday's paper. This is bad. If the public production has terrible actors and the local news speaks about it critically, now ticket sales will fail." Well, this person has really covered a lot of different areas, right? So first they're talking about public relations management is a speculative risk. Well, they can't really say that. It's a functional unit of the marketing domain, but the functional unit is not a risk. It's never a risk. There are risks within that public relations management, and this person alluded to some of those risks, which has to do with whether they're getting good press, and or not, right? So this can affect ticket sales, which is kind of a little different category. However, as we know, risks and events that happen within the same domain can definitely cross over and bleed into different functional units. They can even bleed over into different domains. But how you frame your potential risk, you want it to be very clear what domain and what functional unit that risk is falling into. So how could we say that better? Actually, so how you could say that better, let me do it off the cuff because I didn't have that one figured out, but you could say, just as I referred to, a potential risk is that the show will get poor reviews and get bad public relations advertising, okay? And as a result, ticket sales will drop. So the risk is that they would get bad reviews, okay? And so you really want to state it clearly. So this one I did write out and have really clearly. So one of this, someone says, communication is always at risk. Well, what is it about communication? I mean, we all know that there's miscommunication and people misunderstand things, but the functional unit communication that's within operations is not a risk in itself. So what you can do, and this particular person was talking about a production that was put on, and the show started before all the people had gotten seated. So the risk that you could state is there's a potential risk of a breakdown in communication between the projection technicians and the backstage crew, which could cause the show to start before the front of the house is ready. Now, this is a very specific description of a potential risk. That's what you want to go for. You don't want the reader to be putting words in your mouth. The reader doesn't really know what you're going for. So if you leave room for the reader to fill in blanks, then whatever you end up saying may not fit with whatever they've come up with in their mind. So you really need to be specific about this. So another thing is, another example is, the person says, I think the risk domain is the most important for this event. One reason is because it's a large event. Again, pretty vague. It's a large event, but so what? What about it being a large event? Why does that target the risk domain? Sometimes with a large event, you might be worried about attendee management more. And in fact, you could say, for example, if it was a large outdoor event, how do you keep track of who has paid to go in the festival and who's deserving of getting a wristband? In outdoor events, you always have a lot of people that try to get into the event for free. So attendee management is really important. The whole registration area, the entrance is really important to have it well manned. So for a large, and of course, there's other risks that are potentially there for a large outdoor event with people drinking a lot and everything. Then you have the health and safety risk of your attendees that fall into alcohol abuse, when people drink too much or they get a little wild and crazy because they've been drinking too much. Well, that falls into the risk domain with health and safety, right? But really, maybe your primary concern would be attendee management, because you want people to pay to get into that show because it costs a lot to produce that show. So for you, attendee management is the primary potential risk that you're trying to mitigate. And of course, maybe a very close second place would be potential risks that are in your risk domain. So it's all, again, how the event is framed and your potential risk. So you also have to think of the goals and objectives of the event if you're going to identify what is the most important potential risk that an event planner might be focusing on.